The sun lay low, its reflection stretched across the hoods of parked cars and the glass faces of office buildings. Late afternoon in Arlington had a particular stillness, a hush that felt both civilized and watchful. Every street seemed to carry the residue of order, trimmed hedges, precise crosswalks, the faint echo of commuter traffic softening into routine. Officer Darren Holt sat in his cruiser at the edge of Fairfax Drive, his forearm resting on the door, a paper cup of coffee cooling beside the gear shift. The air conditioner hummed steadily, a mechanical breath masking the shallowness of his own. He watched the road with the practiced detachment of someone who had long ago mistaken vigilance for virtue. When the black Lexus turned the corner, he noticed immediately. Sleek, polished, no tags or stickers, no dents, no hesitation. It moved like it had permission to exist, which was what bothered him most. Through the windshield he caught sight of the driver, a woman, black, alone. Mid-40s maybe. Sunglasses, upright posture, hand steady on the wheel. The light caught the side of her face and lingered there, as if the sun itself had chosen to highlight the anomaly. He lowered the coffee cup and adjusted the rearview mirror, pretending it was about glare. It wasn't. The hum of the cruiser grew louder in his head, and something inside him, not thought but impulse, began to gather shape. He told himself it was routine, a simple check. The kind of stop he had done 100 times. Probable cause, community safety, due diligence. The phrases drifted through his mind like old hymns. He didn't believe them entirely, but he knew their rhythm. His thumb brushed the edge of his holster, not consciously. Just habit, the way others might check their watch. The Lexus signaled, even though no one else was near. The gesture struck him as unnecessary, maybe arrogant. That calm, that composure. He flicked on his lights. The red and blue reflection scattered across the street, a burst of color against the muted afternoon. And the Lexus slowed, signaling again before easing onto the shoulder. Each movement was measured, deliberate, polite. That was what unsettled him most. He parked behind her a precise 2 meters away. The cruiser idled with a faint tremor that pulsed through the steering wheel into his palms. He looked at the dashboard camera, the small red light blinking patiently. Already recording. Documentation had its own comfort. He adjusted his belt, glanced once more at the mirror, and opened the door. The sound of the latch echoed louder than expected, sharp, final. The air outside was thick, sun-warmed, smelling faintly of asphalt and exhaust. He felt the weight of the uniform on his shoulders, the tightness of the collar at his throat. He approached slowly, hand grazing the holster again, eyes scanning for any movement. The woman's head remained forward, still. In his periphery, the sunlight bounced off the Lexus's hood, creating a glare that forced him to squint. The car was a mirror now, reflecting back his own figure in distorted brightness. He tapped the window. She rolled it down halfway. "Good afternoon." "Ma'am." His voice came out flatter than intended, an effort at control that sounded like strain. "Good afternoon." "Officer." Calm, courteous. Her tone didn't rise or fall. It simply existed, unbothered. "Can I see your license and registration?" "Of course." She reached toward the glove compartment, slow, visible, but his pulse still leapt. Training took over. Watch the hands, always the hands. He noticed the neatness of her nails, the ringless fingers. A military precision in the way she moved, though he didn't name it yet. "Any reason you pulled me over, officer?" she asked, still without accusation. Her question hovered between them, suspended in the air like dust in sunlight. "There's been reports," he said finally. "Suspicious vehicles in the area. Just making sure everything checks out." It was the kind of answer that required no truth, only authority. She nodded once. "Suspicious," she repeated softly, as if testing the weight of the word. He took her documents and stepped back toward the cruiser. Each step away felt like reprieve. The sunlight fell differently now, weaker, as though the moment itself were dimming. Inside the car, he typed her information into the system. The cursor blinked. No warrants, no infractions, clean record. The kind of driver the system liked to call exemplary. He exhaled slowly. The air conditioner buzzed. The dashboard camera's red light blinked on, off, on, relentless. He stared at the screen longer than needed, inventing hesitation. He could just walk back, return the papers, close the loop. But something in him, pride maybe, or fear of looking weak to the machine that recorded him, wouldn't let go. He watched her through the windshield. She sat perfectly still, both hands visible on the steering wheel, her gaze forward. The line of her shoulders remained level, as though she were standing at silent attention. He thought of his own posture, the slight hunch, the uneven breath, the faint tremor in his fingers. The roles they were meant to play didn't feel natural anymore. He stepped out again. The sun lower now, shadows lengthening across the pavement. "Everything checks out," he said, handing her back the documents. "Thank you," she replied. He waited for a sign of relief, irritation, anything that might validate the necessity of his presence. There was nothing, just composure. He forced a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You have a good day, ma'am." She nodded once more. "You too, officer." She rolled the window back up, her face dissolving behind the reflection of light. He lingered by the cruiser for a moment, pretending to check something on his belt. The silence of the street returned, slow and thick. Even the hum of traffic seemed to hold back, waiting for something unspoken to pass. When he finally stepped back into his car, he caught his own reflection again in the Lexus's dark surface. A figure swallowed by glare. He sat for a long time before driving off. The camera still blinking red. The sunlight shifted, catching the corner of his badge. It flared briefly, a brief, accusing glint, before the angle changed and the light disappeared. The cruiser merged back into the traffic, leaving behind only the faint shimmer of heat on asphalt and the impression of a question never asked aloud. And somewhere, in the silence between those two vehicles, something systemic, not personal, had already spoken. The door opened with a sound too soft for what it meant. A muted click, a sigh of metal, and then she stepped out, deliberate, unhurried, composed. The kind of movement that doesn't seek attention but commands it anyway. Lieutenant Colonel Miriam Reed. Her uniform was immaculate. Dark olive pressed so precisely that the seams caught the light like glass edges. The ribbons on her chest formed a quiet geometry of service, each color a ledger of sacrifice. Sunlight glanced off the insignia at her collar, a flash of rank that cut through the stale air between them. For a moment, Holt didn't move. He had seen uniforms before, parades, security details, ceremonies at the base nearby, but this one was different. This was not a symbol of protection. It was judgment embodied, authority not worn but inhabited. The air seemed to thin. He reached up almost reflexively to adjust his sunglasses. The lenses had always been a comfort, a partition between himself and the world he acted upon. Now they felt like a blindfold. Beneath them, his eyes darted, recalibrating every assumption he had built in the last 5 minutes. She closed the car door with measured precision, the soft thud landing like punctuation at the end of a long, damning sentence. Her left hand brushed her slacks, smoothing fabric without thought. The gesture was automatic, the discipline of years, of inspections and ceremonies, the kind of habit that never forgets who it represents. The silence stretched, not empty but full, thick with recognition. "Ma'am," he said finally, the word catching in his throat. It sounded wrong, like an apology disguised as respect. She looked at him, not with hostility, not even with disappointment. Her gaze was neutral, clinical, the way a surgeon regards a wound before deciding how deep it runs. "Yes, officer." Her tone carried no emotion. It didn't need to. He swallowed. You didn't mention you were..." "I wasn't asked." The answer hung in the air, perfectly proportioned. She stood with her hands behind her back, a posture born of command, not submission. The movement was subtle, almost instinctual, yet it transformed the scene entirely. What had been a stop now resembled an inspection. Holt felt the hierarchy collapse in on itself, the chain of authority reversing direction. Every ounce of procedural confidence he'd carried evaporated, replaced by something raw and unnameable. The body camera blinked red on his chest, indifferent to the shift. It recorded both of them equally, flattening context into pixels. He took a step back, not consciously, but as if pushed by the weight of her stillness. "Colonel," he managed. The title tasted foreign in his mouth. I didn't recognize." "I imagine not," she said. Still quiet. "You pulled me over for driving my own car." He opened his mouth, then closed it. His jaw tensed. It was a routine stop, was it? Not a question, an evaluation. The sun had moved lower, shadows cutting across the asphalt. Behind them, the suburban quiet persisted. A dog barked distantly, a sprinkler hissed, a cyclist turned down another street to avoid the scene. The ordinary world continued, uninterested, but in that narrow stretch of road, the air felt judicial. He removed his sunglasses, finally. His eyes blinked hard against the brightness, the unfiltered truth of daylight. Without the lenses, he felt exposed. The glare off her metals was sharp, and he couldn't tell whether it was the sunlight or shame making his vision blur. "Colonel, I meant no disrespect," he said. "I'm sure you didn't." It was the kind of statement that closed doors. Calm, unassailable. The words landed without malice. But they burned. He tried to meet her eyes again, but couldn't. His gaze fell to her shoes, polished to a reflective shine, catching the light that his own badge now avoided. They looked immovable, rooted in purpose. His own boots suddenly felt heavy, scuffed, ordinary. For the first time in years, he became aware of how he stood, shoulders slightly slouched, weight uneven, hand twitching near the belt. His posture spoke more honestly than his words ever could. She took one measured breath. "You can call this in if you'd like," she said, "but I believe you already ran my plates." His throat tightened. The implication was surgical, not cruel. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Then I'll be on my way." She turned, and for a moment the sunlight hit her full on, face, insignia, the crisp line of her uniform, and the entire scene became unbearably clear. Not dramatic, not loud, just clear. Holt's pulse stuttered in his ears. He wanted to say something, anything, that would reclaim a fragment of dignity, to rewrite what the camera had already captured. But language failed him. Every phrase that came to mind was procedural, defensive, hollow. Instead, he stood in silence as she re-entered her car, her movements as precise as when she'd exited. Door closes, engine starts, signal flashes. The Lexus pulls smoothly onto the road, leaving behind the faint trace of exhaust and a reflection of himself in her rear window. Small, distorted, powerless. The cruiser's radio crackled faintly, a dispatcher's voice listing routine traffic calls. He didn't respond. He slid the sunglasses back on, though the sun was nearly gone now. The lenses no longer shielded him. They only reminded him of the need to hide. Inside the cruiser, he sat still, feeling the hum of the engine beneath him. The body camera light kept blinking, rhythmic and patient. The institution watching its own confusion unfold. He thought about how quickly authority could turn to humiliation. Not because it was taken, but because it was revealed as conditional. Across the street, the reflection of the retreating Lexus shimmered in a storefront window until it disappeared entirely. The silence returned, vast and unbroken. It was not peace, it was aftermath, and in that silence, Holt finally understood what it meant to be seen, not as the enforcer of order, but as its subject. The moment before they spoke was the longest. Silence, drawn taut, humming like wire between them. The cruiser's lights still pulsed against the surrounding brick facades, red and blue in alternating rhythm, the heartbeat of authority, mechanical and impersonal. In that strobe of color, everything looked divided: light, shadow, law, defiance. Holt stood by the Lexus window, his hand hovering near the edge of his belt, unsure now whether to rest or retreat. The training said posture mattered, but no training accounted for this. Inside the car, Lieutenant Colonel Miriam Reed was motionless. Her profile was carved in restraint. The slow turn of her head, the faint shift of her eyes toward him. No glare, no smile, only that still assessing look that stripped away pretense. "License and registration," he said finally. The words were a lifeline to protocol, something to hold on to. She nodded once. "Of course, officer." Her tone was even, professional, the kind used in briefings and after-action reports. It was language as discipline. No trace of deference, yet no defiance either, simply command, refined into courtesy. As she reached for the glove compartment, his shoulders stiffened, instinct bracing before thought could intervene. He realized it, the flinch, the suspicion, and hated that it had become automatic. Her hand paused. "May I?" He blinked. "Go ahead." The latch clicked open, soft, precise. Papers shuffled. A thin leather folder emerged. She passed it to him through the half-open window, her fingers steady. He noticed her nails again. Clipped short, practical. No jewelry, no excess. Every gesture stripped to purpose. The ID rested in his palm, a rectangle of authority more legitimate than his own. U.S. Army, Lieutenant. Colonel Miriam E. Reed. The photograph showed the same calm he now faced in real life, but the still image felt gentler. The living version carried something sharper, the gravity of years, of command under pressure, of having had to master silence long before this moment. He looked from the card to her face. Your active duty? Yes. For how long? 23 years. The number landed heavily. He didn't respond. The arithmetic of service outranked him before he could form a thought. He handed the card back. Your registration, please. She passed it forward wordlessly this time. Their fingers didn't touch, but he felt the distance like an electric field. The body camera on his chest blinked red, patient, unfeeling, recording every hesitation. It captured his shifting posture, her composure, the shallow breath between their words. A silent witness that neither could appeal to. He could hear the faint buzz of cicadas from the nearby trees. The sound filled the space where conversation might have gone, indifferent and relentless. You live in the area, ma'am? I do. Pause. Nice neighborhood. Yes. Another pause, heavier now. He wanted to fill it, but couldn't find the right shape of language. Every word he tried felt like an admission. Her eyes held his for a second longer than comfort allowed. There was no challenge in them, only precision. She had learned long ago that truth didn't need volume. Finally, she spoke. Do you stop every black driver in a Lexus, officer? The question arrived without anger, without ornament. It was surgical, a cut so clean it didn't bleed right away. He inhaled. No, ma'am. That's not... Then what was it? Her voice was low, almost kind. That made it worse. He stared at the body camera's red light. Routine check. She gave a single nod, the smallest concession to civility. That's what I thought. He wanted to look away, but her gaze held him. There was no fury there, just comprehension, full and merciless. When she finally turned her head, the world seemed to exhale. He looked down at his hands. The ID badge clipped to his chest caught a beam of sun and glinted sharply. For the first time, the badge felt like something heavy rather than protective. Its shine didn't mean integrity, only permission. He thought of what the camera saw. Not context, not fear, not apology. Just two figures locked in a quiet exchange, the kind that would later be reviewed, time-stamped, maybe filed away. The system didn't record what it meant. Only that it happened. She broke the silence again. Do you have what you need, officer? He nodded automatically. Yes, ma'am. Then I'll be going. He stepped back, the movement stiff, almost defensive. Drive safe. Her lips pressed into something that might have been acknowledgement. She put the car into gear, the hum of the engine filling the silence he'd created. As the Lexus rolled forward, he caught her reflection in the rearview mirror, the faint outline of her face, steady, unshaken. The mirror's glass turned her into something spectral, unreachable. He stood there long after she was gone, hand still hovering near his badge. The sunlight faded on the metal until it went dull. When he finally returned to the cruiser, he removed the camera and set it on the seat beside him. The little red light still blinked, recording empty space now. The interior of the vehicle, the hum of the engine, his slow, uneven breathing. He stared at it, knowing that somewhere in the coming days, a superior officer might review the footage. They would see nothing extraordinary. No raised voices, no violence, no explicit breach of conduct. Just a traffic stop, routine. They wouldn't hear the silence. They wouldn't feel the reversal that had occurred in that brief exchange. The collapse of presumption, the exposure of habit. He looked down at his ID badge once more. Its plastic surface scratched, its corners bent. His name, his title, his authority, printed in black on a field of white. It looked official, but suddenly fragile. For the first time, he wondered what it must be like to walk through the world and have that fragility assumed of you before a word is spoken. The thought came and went like a tremor, too late to undo anything, too subtle to confess. Outside, the road was quiet again. The same calm, the same sunlight indifferent, but to him, everything felt altered. The air heavier, the silence charged, the uniform tighter across his shoulders, and though the world resumed its shape, something inside him did not. The precinct was fluorescent and airless, Light too white, air too dry. A building designed for efficiency, not conscience. The walls were lined with corkboards of outdated bulletins and motivational posters that no one read anymore. Somewhere, a printer hummed like a restrained sigh. Officer Darren Holt sat at his desk, posture disciplined but frayed at the edges. His uniform shirt had creased around the elbows. His badge reflected the overhead light in sterile flashes. The computer screen glowed before him, the report interface open, cursor blinking at the top of an empty field. Incident type, traffic stop, routine check. He began typing. On October 19th at approximately 16:30 hours, Officer D. Holt conducted a routine vehicle stop on Fairfax Drive due to a suspected irregularity. He paused, backspaced over suspected irregularity. Typed routine check for license verification. Backspaced again. The words looked wrong. Too blunt, too visible. Each keystroke felt like confession disguised as procedure. He leaned back, ran a hand over his face, and tried again. Driver was cooperative, provided documentation without delay. No violations found. He stopped. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, suspended. The fluorescent light flickered once above him, a brief stutter in the stillness. He added, "Interaction lasted approximately 7 minutes. No further action required." It sounded clean, official, sanitized. But beneath the bureaucratic rhythm, he could hear the echo of her voice. "Do you stop every black driver in a Lexus, officer?" The question hung somewhere between his thoughts and the steady hum of the ventilation system. He reached for his coffee, now cold, and took a sip anyway. The bitterness grounded him. He looked at the report again and scrolled to the officer notes section. Optional, rarely read, but always reviewed if things went wrong. He hesitated. The cursor blinked patient. Finally he wrote, "Driver identified as Lieutenant Colonel Miriam E. Reed, active duty. Displayed professional demeanor throughout. Displayed professional demeanor." He deleted throughout, added it back, then deleted it again. He couldn't decide whether it sounded like admiration or self-defense. Across town, in a different building, another cursor blinked. Lieutenant Colonel Reed sat in a narrow office with no windows, the kind assigned to transient officers and visiting liaisons. The overhead light was the same merciless white. A government-issued stapler, a half-empty water bottle, a computer terminal waiting for form completion. She adjusted her posture, straight-backed as always, and began typing her account. On October 19th, while driving home from Fort Myer, I was pulled over by Officer D. Holt of the Arlington Police Department. The officer provided no clear reason for the stop, stating only that there were reports of suspicious vehicles in the area. Her tone was precise, each word selected like a carefully placed tile. No embellishment, no emotional register. The discipline of language she had learned from decades of briefings and investigations. She continued, "I complied fully with all requests. No citation was issued. I believe the stop was made without reasonable cause." She stopped, stared at the sentence for a long moment. The screen glared back, asking for something more, an adjective, an accusation, a feeling. But feelings were not admissible in the bureaucratic dialect of justice. She added only, "I am submitting this statement for the record." Then she signed it electronically. Lieutenant Colonel Miriam E. Reed. The stapler clicked once as she assembled her physical file, the sound sharp and absolute. It echoed faintly in the sterile room, a punctuation mark of finality. Back at the precinct, Holt printed his report, reviewed it line by line. The words looked harmless in ink. That was their power. He found himself rereading the section with her name. Lieutenant Colonel. The rank still carried weight in his chest, not just because it outranked him, but because it revealed the distance between who he thought he was and how she had seen him. He signed at the bottom, initials tight and efficient. Officer D. Holt, badge 5473. The act of signing didn't feel like closure. It felt like burial. He stood and walked the report to Sergeant Delaney's office. The sergeant was a broad man with indifferent eyes, surrounded by stacks of folders and the faint smell of reheated food. He took the report without looking up. Routine stop. "Yes, sir." "Anything escalate?" "No, sir." "Good." File it under cleared, no action. The stapler clicked again, louder this time. Final. Holt nodded, turned to leave, but paused. "Sir," he said, hesitating, "what if someone files a complaint?" Delaney finally looked up, expression unreadable. Then we'll review the footage. If there's nothing, there's nothing. Just make sure the paperwork's clean. Clean. The word lingered in Holt's mind as he returned to his desk. Clean didn't mean right. Clean meant invisible. He sat again, staring at the glow of the screen. The cursor had returned to its blinking rhythm, as if urging him to keep typing, as if bureaucracy itself demanded more confession. Across town, Miriam submitted her statement. The system generated a confirmation receipt, time-stamped and impersonal. She printed it anyway, folded it neatly, and slid it into a manila folder labeled personal copies. Years of service had taught her never to trust electronic archives alone. She leaned back, exhaling through her nose, the way she did after completing an after-action report. Except this wasn't a mission debrief. It was survival documentation. In the quiet of the office, she looked at the ceiling's fluorescent grid, white light arranged like a cage of squares. She wondered how many times her name had passed through invisible systems like this one, tagged, logged, forgotten. In the precinct, Holt powered down his computer. The room hummed with after-hours fatigue. A few officers lingered, talking low, their laughter carrying no warmth. He gathered his things, badge, notebook, keys, and caught his reflection in the dark monitor screen. The image was faint, distorted by glare, but unmistakable. He realized that the report he had just filed wasn't a record of what had happened. It was an artifact of how the institution wanted to see it. Two documents existed now, bound by time and bureaucracy, his and hers. Both true, neither complete. One filed under routine, the other under complaint. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, steady and unrelenting. Their glare flattened everything, guilt, dignity, fatigue, into the same colorless shade. The system would digest both reports soon enough. They would be reviewed, time-stamped, categorized, and buried in servers until memory itself grew administrative. But for now, in two separate rooms under the same indifferent light, both authors sat in silence, each aware, in their own way, that the truth had already been translated into paperwork, and that translation, like all official language, made everyone smaller. The hearing room was neither large nor small. It was proportioned for neutrality, a space designed to contain conflict without showing preference. Beige walls, a seal of the department affixed above the chair of the presiding officer. Two flags standing at exact angles behind her, one for the state, one for the nation. Their colors muted by fluorescent light. The air was cold, recirculated. Every sound, a shuffle of paper, a throat clearing, the scrape of a chair, carried too far. Officer Darren Holt sat at the left table. His uniform was crisp, every crease deliberate, but the fabric felt foreign on his skin. The folder before him held his written statement, a printed transcript of the body camera footage, and the department's preliminary review. He had read them so many times he could recite them without looking. Across from him, Lieutenant Colonel Miriam Reed sat at the opposite table. No counsel, no entourage, just her uniform, and her poise. Her hands were folded neatly on the table, fingers aligned, palms relaxed. Her ribbons caught the overhead light in precise intervals, a quiet reminder of earned authority. The recorder on the desk between them glowed red. A steady dot, watching, storing, converting human discomfort into evidence. At the center table sat the board, 3 officers, 2 civilians. Faces expressionless, eyes scanning documents. Their pens were lined in front of them, unclicked. Neutrality was policy here. The presiding officer, a woman with iron-gray hair and a voice calibrated for restraint, began. This is an internal review of a complaint filed by Lieutenant Colonel Miriam Reed against Officer Darren Holt regarding a traffic stop on October 19th. Her tone was flat. No emphasis, no empathy. Bureaucracy distilled into speech. Both parties have submitted written statements. Today's hearing is to clarify discrepancies, if any, in those accounts. A pause, the kind that stretched just long enough to remind everyone what silence could do. Officer Holt, you'll begin. He cleared his throat. Yes, ma'am. His voice sounded smaller than he'd intended. On October 19th, I was conducting a routine patrol along Fairfax Drive. I observed a black Lexus matching the description of a vehicle connected to prior suspicious activity. I initiated a traffic stop to confirm identity and registration. His words flowed easily, the practiced cadence of the report he'd memorized. Upon approach, I requested license and registration. The driver complied fully. The stop concluded without incident. He stopped speaking. The room absorbed his statement without acknowledgement. The presiding officer nodded once. "Lieutenant Colonel Reed." Miriam inclined her head slightly. "The officer's account is accurate in sequence," she began. Her voice was even, unforced. However, the reason for the stop was fabricated. There were no active alerts for my vehicle. The officer admitted as much when questioned. She didn't look at Holt as she said it. Her eyes stayed fixed on the panel, steady, calm. A board member asked, "Colonel Reed, can you describe the tone of the interaction?" "Professional," she said. "Controlled. I would also describe it as unnecessary." Another pause. The clock on the far wall ticked audibly now. Mechanical, precise, indifferent. Holt shifted in his seat. "With respect, ma'am," he interjected. "I followed standard procedure. The department encourages vigilance." The presiding officer raised a hand. "Officer Holt, you'll speak when addressed." He nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." The correction stung more than it should have. The board continued. "Colonel, did the officer display unprofessional behavior?" "No," she said. "He displayed professional behavior in the service of an unprofessional assumption." The line landed quietly, but it changed the air in the room. One of the civilian panelists looked up for the first time. The presiding officer's pen tapped once against her notes, an almost imperceptible sound. "Would you clarify what you mean by unprofessional assumption?" Miriam exhaled softly, though not from fatigue. "I was pulled over because the officer could not reconcile the sight of a black woman driving a late-model luxury car with the idea of innocence." "That's not personal offense, it's pattern recognition." Her hands remained folded. Her posture never changed. Every word was delivered with military precision, as if reciting from a field manual on dignity. The presiding officer's gaze shifted to Holt. "Do you wish to respond?" He hesitated. His pulse was loud in his ears, a private noise in a public room. "With respect," he said again, quieter this time. "That wasn't my intent." "Intent," Miriam said, finally looking at him, "is a fragile defense." Their eyes met across the sterile table. Two uniforms, two systems, two truths, each bound by a loyalty the other didn't share. The silence that followed was longer than any testimony. It wasn't awkward. It was judgment, unspoken and complete. The presiding officer cleared her throat, returning to procedure. "The board will review the body camera footage and determine whether any departmental policy was violated." The recorder's red light flickered slightly, a small mechanical blink that felt almost alive. Holt straightened. "The footage will show professionalism on my part," he said too quickly. Miriam didn't respond. Her stillness said everything that couldn't be recorded. The board conferred briefly among themselves, their voices low. Phrases like policy adherence, implicit context, and no escalation drifted into the air like detached verdicts. Then the presiding officer spoke again. "This review is not a disciplinary hearing. Our objective is to ensure protocol integrity." The phrase hung in the air, perfectly sterile. Protocol integrity, a way to discuss injustice without ever naming it. Miriam nodded once, as though confirming the inevitable. Holt looked down at his folded hands, the veins visible under the strain of restraint. They didn't look like the hands of a protector anymore. They looked like instruments of procedure. The clock ticked again, louder now, or maybe just closer. When the session adjourned, no one stood immediately. The recorder light went dark. The flags behind the presiding officer drooped slightly in the stale air. Miriam rose first, collecting her folder with deliberate precision. She thanked the board quietly, turned and walked out, her posture as exact as when she had stepped out of her car that afternoon. Holt remained seated for a moment, staring at the empty space she had left. The room felt larger now, its neutrality exposed as emptiness. He finally stood, adjusted his belt, and nodded to the board. His voice, when it came, was soft. "Understood." Outside, in the hallway, the sound of her footsteps was already fading. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, an artificial hum that filled every pause, every conscience, and somewhere behind the beige walls, the recorder continued to store the silence. The decision arrived in a plain envelope. No letterhead, just the department's seal stamped faintly in blue. Inside, a single page. clean, sparse, unyielding. Following internal review, the board finds no evidence of misconduct. Recommendation: policy review for officer awareness and community relations. A sentence constructed to appear as balance. In truth, it was erasure disguised as procedure. Miriam Reed read it once, then again, slower. The words held no surprise, only confirmation of what she already knew the day she stood on the roadside, sunlight on her face, watching the officer's fear masquerade as authority. She folded the letter carefully, pressed the crease flat with her thumb, and slid it back into the envelope. No reaction, no outward trace of disappointment. A soldier does not show emotion in uniform. Outside, the late autumn light had shifted, sharper, thinner, the kind of light that revealed everything without warmth. Her Lexus waited in the driveway, clean and silent. The same car, the same route ahead. She stepped into it with practiced ease, movements mechanical, controlled. When she closed the door, the soft thud sealed her back inside the world that had tested her. The ignition hummed. The radio stayed off. She adjusted the seat, then reached for the rearview mirror. For a moment, her reflection stared back, composed, deliberate, the ribbons on her chest faintly visible in the shadowed glass. But this time, she tilted the mirror slightly higher. Not to see what followed her, but to remind herself what must never be unseen. The road stretched ahead, an unbroken gray ribbon. Traffic moved in obedient lines. Every car a story, every stoplight a choice disguised as order. She merged smoothly, signal blinking once, precise as her posture. The city unfolded, glass facades reflecting the low sun, polished towers of administration and commerce. Inside those buildings, men and women filed reports, conducted reviews, upheld procedure, each believing in the quiet fiction of fairness. A red light caught her at the next intersection. She waited. The crosswalk counted down, faceless numbers on a digital display. 10, 9, 8. A pedestrian glanced at her car. A young man, hoodie up, earbuds in. His eyes flicked toward her, then away. The gesture was small, unconscious, but she noticed. She always noticed now. The light turned green. She drove on. Across town, in a station office with fluorescent fatigue seeping through the walls, Officer Darren Holt signed his final paperwork for the case. The review had cleared him. His supervisor offered a short nod, acknowledgement without warmth. "Keep your eyes open," the supervisor said. "Stay cautious." He nodded too, but when he returned to his patrol car that evening, the seat felt different. The silence heavier. He adjusted his own mirror and saw not the road but the shadow of his own hesitation staring back. His reflection didn't accuse him. It simply waited. 2 vehicles, 2 mirrors, same city, different burdens. The department issued a memo a week later. Reminder: all officers to complete bias awareness module by end of quarter. Attached was a link, a deadline, and a box to check once finished. Policy review completed. Institutional conscience satisfied. The system had done its work. Quietly, thoroughly, efficiently. Miriam drove the familiar route again on a Sunday morning. Early sunlight glared across the windshield, the same bright, unflinching light that had once reflected suspicion. Now it burned steadier, like a truth too bright to look at directly. She passed the intersection where it had happened, the same stretch of asphalt, the same row of sycamores. A patrol car sat at the far end, parked at an angle, its roof lights dormant. For a moment, her pulse tightened. Reflex, not fear. Then she exhaled, slow and steady. She did not look away. The world moved on, indifferent. In the months that followed, the video of her stop circulated quietly through online forums and departmental training slides. Stripped of names, context, and consequence. A teaching tool, a cautionary example. It played in muted conference rooms where officers took notes they would never use. The system absorbed the moment, digested it, filed it away. Not erased, merely reclassified. In another meeting, a city official referenced the incident during a diversity committee session. "We're making progress," she said, pointing to new initiatives, new slogans. "The data shows improvement." No one in the room mentioned the name Miriam Reed or the name Darren Holt. They had become placeholders, symbols for a cycle that demanded continuity over change. The road, like the system, was always under repair but never closed. As the weeks passed, Miriam began to notice how light behaved differently now. How the afternoon sun hit the hood of her car, not as glare but as declaration. Each time it flashed, she saw it for what it was: exposure. Truth burns and blinds. At a red light one evening, she rested her hand on the steering wheel and looked straight ahead. Her uniform jacket lay folded in the passenger seat beside her, ribbons still gleaming in the dim glow. The weight of service, the evidence of discipline. Behind her, a horn sounded faintly, the signal to move. She pressed the accelerator and eased forward, the city's skyline rising before her in muted silhouette. There was no triumph in her expression, no bitterness either. Only clarity. The kind that does not demand applause. Only acknowledgement, because the system had not failed. It had functioned exactly as designed, and yet she remained. Driving forward, mirror adjusted, eyes open. The road ahead shimmered under the relentless sun, smooth, familiar, and infinite. Each mile a quiet protest of continuity, each reflection a record of what it means to be seen.